Queen Exalira's throne room glimmered with a cold, unyielding radiance, the crystalline walls refracting pale light in waves that bathed her in an ethereal glow. Her opalescent white skin, shifting subtly like liquid pearl under the bioluminescent ceiling, made her appear more a divine figure than a ruler. To her people, she was a living goddess. But today, as she sat rigid on her throne, her chin held high despite the invisible weight crushing her, she felt nothing like one. The Grand Hall of Zarathian Dominion was a marvel. Columns carved from translucent or stretched endlessly upward, veins of silver running through them like captured lightning. The air shimmered faintly with the ever-present hum of technology integrated seamlessly into Zarathian architecture. Mural-like projections decorated the walls, depicting their species' history, a saga of triumphs, expansion, and the unbroken lineage of their monarchs. Until her, the murals cast an unspoken accusation every time she looked at them. Exalira's lavender eyes, sharp, calculating, and tinged with sorrow she dared not show, swept across the council chamber as her advisors droned on about trade routes and territorial disputes. The words washed over her without impact. She had mastered the art of appearing attentive, while her thoughts wandered to the far more urgent issue consuming her existence. For centuries, the Zarathians had been guided by queens, each producing heirs that embodied both their genetic superiority and their society's continuity. Fertility was central to their identity, a blend of biology and culture so intertwined that failing in this regard was unthinkable. A Zarathian queen's ability to reproduce wasn't just a personal duty. It was the keystone of their empire's stability. Exalira, despite her beauty, her intellect, and her military prowess, had borne no children. Her advisors framed it as an unfortunate circumstance. Her people whispered of divine punishment or a curse. Diplomatically, her failure to produce an heir weakened her standing, leaving allies uncertain and enemies emboldened. Personally, it gnawed at her, a constant ache she concealed behind the icy mask of leadership. The sharp voice of High Advisor Verkin pierced her thoughts. "Your Majesty, the human delegation is requesting an audience. They insist the matter pertains to solutions for personal matters." His hesitation over the final phrase betrayed his discomfort, but his emerald skin remained expressionless. Exalira's eyes narrowed. Humans, recent arrivals on the galactic stage, their species was as unpredictable as it was innovative. They lacked the elegance and refinement of the older civilizations, but had an uncanny ability to excel in areas where others had failed. Their chaos was both a liability and occasionally an asset. She had invited their delegation to this summit as a calculated risk, but their inclusion in sensitive discussions had already caused ripples among her council. "Send them in," she commanded, her voice cool and measured. The chamber doors groaned open moments later, revealing the human envoy. At their head was Commander Jack Sullivan. He strode into the hall with an air of confidence bordering on arrogance, his movements fluid yet casual. His tawny skin glowed faintly under the hall's light, and his sharp hazel eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail as if assessing a battlefield. Unlike the Zarathians' flowing robes and ceremonial garb, Jack's uniform was practical, almost rugged, though it bore the insignia of Earth's Interstellar Federation. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone a blend of respect and irreverence. "It's an honor to stand before you." Exalira studied him, noting the faint smirk tugging at his lips. His messy charm grated against her preference for formality, yet something about his energy intrigued her. Humans had that effect. They were unsettling but undeniably magnetic. "You've requested an audience," Exalira said, her voice like tempered steel. "I trust it is for something of value, Commander Sullivan." Jack inclined his head. "That depends on how you define value. If you mean a solution to a problem no one else has been able to solve, then yes, I'd say it's worth your time." The room stilled. Her advisors exchanged uneasy glances, their tension palpable. Jack's words had pierced the veneer of detachment Exalira worked so hard to maintain. She leaned forward slightly, her opalescent skin catching the light in shimmering waves. "You presume much," she said. Explain yourself. Jack met her gaze, his hazel eyes unwavering. Your people scientists have spent decades trying to solve the infertility issue, haven't they? From what I've read, Zyrathian biology is complex, adaptive, but also rigid in certain key areas. You've exhausted every traditional avenue, and it's gotten you nowhere. A murmur swept through the chamber. Zyrathians rarely spoke so openly about their queen's struggles, let alone in public. Jack, either unaware or unconcerned with the breach of decorum, continued. Humans are different, he said. Our biology is, let's call it improvisational. We've survived and thrived by adapting to challenges no one thought we could overcome. If Zyrathian science can't crack the code, maybe human ingenuity can. Exalira's lavender eyes narrowed. And what precisely do you propose? Surely you're not suggesting that humans hold the key to Zyrathian reproduction. Not humans, Jack said with a grin. Just me. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Exalira's unflappable composure faltered for a fraction of a second. She recovered quickly, her voice sharper than before. You believe yourself capable of succeeding where our greatest minds have failed. Jack shrugged, his confidence undimmed. You've tried everything else, haven't you? What's one more shot in the dark? Verkin stepped forward, his voice tight with indignation. Your Majesty, this human's arrogance is an insult. Enough, Exalira said, cutting him off. Her gaze remained fixed on Jack. You speak as though this is a game, Commander. It is not. Jack's grin faded, replaced by a seriousness that surprised her. I know it's not. I'm not here to waste your time. I'm here because I think we can help each other. Exalira held his gaze for a long moment, searching for deceit and finding none. Her people's solutions had all failed, their rigidity proving their downfall. Perhaps it was time to embrace the unpredictable, the chaotic. Very well, she said, her voice carrying the weight of her decision. You will have access to our scientists and facilities. But understand this. Failure is not an option. Jack inclined his head, his smirk returning. Don't worry, Your Majesty. Failure's never been my style. As he turned and walked away, Exalira felt an unfamiliar mix of trepidation and curiosity. She had just invited a human into the heart of her empire, gambling her legacy on the possibility of an impossible solution. For better or worse, the game had begun. The laboratory hummed with energy, its sleek walls alive with pulsing lights that followed no discernible pattern, as though the room itself breathed. Despite the cutting-edge technology surrounding her, Queen Exalira stood with arms crossed, her opalescent skin shimmering faintly under the glow. She appeared calm, but her eyes betrayed a storm of doubt. Jack Sullivan leaned against a console at the far end of the room, his stance casual but his hazel eyes sharp as he surveyed the alien equipment. He tapped a finger rhythmically on the metal surface, waiting for Exalira to break the silence. She didn't, forcing him to fill the void. You know, Jack began, his voice light but probing, it's kind of impressive. Your people have created technology that makes ours look like toys. Yet no one's thought to say, hey, what if we stop being so Zyrathian about it? Exalira's eyes narrowed. And what exactly does it mean to be Zyrathian about something? Jack met her glare, unflinching. Rigid, too bound to tradition. You're perfectionists, which is great, until it isn't. A faint ripple of irritation crossed her flawless features, but she didn't respond immediately. Jack took her silence as permission to continue. Humans don't have the luxury of perfection, he said, gesturing vaguely. Our survival depends on messy solutions. Half the time, we don't even know why something works until it does. Exalira tilted her head, her curiosity visible despite herself. And you believe chaos is an effective strategy? I believe adaptability is, Jack corrected. He stood straighter, his casual demeanor giving way to something more earnest. And maybe what you need isn't another Zyrathian solution. Maybe it's a human one. The room fell silent again, save for the low hum of machinery. Exalira's gaze shifted to the holographic display in the center of the lab, which projected a detailed model of her genetic structure. The intricate web of bioluminescent threads highlighted the dormant reproductive system that had plagued her for years. It was a flawless failure, a body built for greatness that refused to fulfill its most basic purpose. "You're asking me to abandon centuries of knowledge," Exilira said finally, her voice measured. "To trust an untested, unpredictable species with the future of my empire." Jack stepped closer, the faint scent of something earthy and unfamiliar following him. "I'm not asking you to trust humanity. I'm asking you to trust me." She raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched into her expression. "Why you?" "Because I'm the only one who'll say what needs to be said," he replied without hesitation. "Your people see you as a goddess. I see you as someone who's desperate enough to take a chance on the one species everyone else underestimates." Exilira's lips pressed into a thin line. His words struck a nerve, but she refused to let it show. "And your solution? What is it?" Jack glanced at the glowing genetic display, his expression turning uncharacteristically serious. "Your scientists have already tried splicing genes, haven't they? Cloning, bioengineering, all the fancy stuff. But they're too focused on keeping everything purely Zyrathian. That's the problem." "We are Zyrathians," she replied sharply. "Our purity defines us." "Purity's overrated," Jack shot back. "Look, your biology's adaptive, right? It's why your species evolves so perfectly to its environment. But evolution thrives on diversity, not isolation." Exilira's gaze flicked to the model again, as if searching for the truth in his words. "You propose mixing our genetics." Jack nodded. "Your tech couldn't handle the differences before. Human DNA's unpredictable. But you didn't have me then. And what makes you uniquely suited to this?" she asked, her tone teetering between genuine curiosity and disdain. Jack grinned. "Well, for one, I'm here. For two, I've got genes that seem to play nice with just about anything. Call it a fluke of evolution." Her lips quirked, almost imperceptibly. "Arrogance is not a substitute for results." "No," Jack agreed, "but it makes a hell of a sales pitch." For the first time, Exilira let out a soft laugh, more an exhale than a sound. She caught herself quickly, her expression hardening once more. "In the process? How do you intend to proceed?" Jack hesitated, his grin faltering for the briefest moment. Well, that's where things get less clinical." Her brows knitted together, confusion flashing across her face. "Less clinical?" Jack rubbed the back of his neck, his usual confidence dimming under her intense scrutiny. "Your scientists already said artificial methods don't work. Something about incompatibility at the molecular level. So, the next step would be direct interaction." The meaning of his words hung heavy in the air. Exilira's eyes widened slightly, though she quickly regained her composure. "You're suggesting physical involvement?" Jack raised his hands defensively. "Hey, it's not my first choice either. I mean, I'm all for intergalactic cooperation, but I figured we'd start with like shared trade routes." Exilira's gaze turned icy. "You mock the gravity of this situation." "I'm not mocking," Jack said, his tone softening. "I get it. This is huge. It's your legacy, your people, your future. But if we're going to make this work, we need to stop pretending it's anything less than what it is, a leap of faith." She studied him, her expression unreadable. Jack, for once, didn't break the silence with a quip. He simply waited, his hazel eyes steady and sincere. Finally, Exilira straightened, her regal demeanor unshaken. "Very well, Commander. If you truly believe this is the solution, then we will proceed." Jack exhaled, tension he hadn't realized he was holding leaving his body. "I'll do everything I can, Your Majesty." Her eyes locked onto his, their intensity unwavering. "You had better, Commander, because if you fail, it will not just be your reputation at stake." Jack nodded, the weight of her words clear. "Understood." As the Queen turned to leave, Jack watched her go, the faint glow of her opalescent skin lingering in his mind like an afterimage. He had come to the Zyrathian Empire expecting to broker treaties and alliances, not to rewrite the genetic destiny of a species. But here he was, walking headfirst into the unknown. And for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure he'd make it out unscathed. The laboratory pulsed with a serene hum, its bioluminescent walls glowing faintly like the surface of a tranquil sea. Streams of holographic data cascaded in midair, mapping the intricate dance of Zyrathian and human genetics. Queen Exilira stood at the center, her regal composure a fragile mask over the tension coiled in her chest. She had prepared herself for war countless times, but this was an entirely different battlefield. Jack Sullivan leaned against the edge of a diagnostic console, his hazel eyes flicking from the data streams to Exilira. His usual grin was absent, replaced by an uncharacteristic seriousness. The air between them felt charged, the unspoken implications of what lay ahead pressing down like the weight of a star. "All right," Jack said, breaking the silence. His voice carried none of his usual levity. "Before we start, I need to know you're sure about this." Exilira's lavender gaze swept over him, cool and unflinching. Her opalescent skin glimmered under the soft light, every movement precise and deliberate. "Your hesitation is unnecessary, Commander. This is not the first time I've made a difficult decision." Jack crossed his arms, leaning back slightly. "Decisions are one thing. This feels a little personal." "It is personal," she replied sharply, her tone carrying an edge that could cut through steel. "For my people, this is survival. I do not take it lightly." "Neither do I," Jack said, his voice softer now. He straightened, meeting her gaze head-on. "That's why I'm asking. If this is just duty to you, fine. But if there's even a part of you that doesn't want to do this, say it now." Exilira hesitated. The commander's earnestness disarmed her, an unexpected vulnerability surfacing beneath his usual bravado. She had never encountered a human so openly defiant, yet so sincere. Zyrathian's prized strength. But Jack's strength lay in his unpredictability, his willingness to confront what others would avoid. "This is not about what I want," Exilira said at last, her voice quieter now. "It is about what must be done." Jack nodded slowly, as though weighing her words. "All right, let's do what must be done." The chamber had been prepared meticulously, blending Zyrathian precision with an intimacy that unsettled Exilira. Soft, glowing panels lined the walls, their light creating an ambient warmth. The central biobed, crafted from a material that shimmered like liquid crystal, had been calibrated to monitor their every physiological response. It was clinical yet oddly inviting. Exilira approached the biobed with measured steps, her translucent ceremonial robes trailing behind her like liquid starlight. She felt exposed in a way she had never experienced before, her authority as queen stripped away to reveal something raw and vulnerable beneath. Jack, sensing her discomfort, remained silent, his presence a steady counterpoint to her uncertainty. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You understand the importance of this, Commander. There is no room for error." Jack stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "Trust me, Your Majesty." "I get it." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers before stopping just short of contact. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Exilira hesitated for a fraction of a second before giving a single, almost imperceptible nod. Jack's fingers brushed against hers, his touch warm and grounding. Zyrathian skin, smooth and faintly cool, shimmered where it met his, the faint glow intensifying with the connection. The chamber sensors reacted instantly, the biobed emitting a soft chime as their biological signatures began to sync. Exilira drew in a steadying breath, her composure faltering for the first time. "Human intimacy is different from ours," she said, her voice quieter now. "It is not something I fully understand." Jack smiled gently, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something softer. "It's not something you have to understand. You just feel it." He closed the distance between them, his hand trailing up her arm, leaving a faint trail of warmth in its wake. Exilira shivered involuntarily, her body responding to sensations she had never experienced before. The intensity of human touch was unlike anything in Zyrathian culture, where physicality was often ceremonial or functional. Their gazes met, and for a moment, The enormity of what they were about to do hung between them. Jack leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her skin. "Are you ready?" Exalira didn't answer with words. Instead, she placed a hand on his chest, the faint luminescence of her skin spreading across him like liquid light. It was a silent affirmation, an acknowledgement of what was at stake. The process began slowly, their bodies and minds adjusting to the unfamiliarity of each other. Jack's hands moved with surprising gentleness, his touch firm but careful, as though afraid of breaking her. Exalira, for all her composed elegance, found herself trembling, her breath catching as waves of warmth spread through her. The biobed pulsed beneath them, monitoring their progress as the interface guided their actions. The holographic displays above them showed the intricate fusion of their genetic codes, the human chaos melding with Zyrathian precision in a delicate balance. "Your species," Exalira said, her voice breathless. "You overwhelm." Jack chuckled softly, his tone laced with affection. "We're good at that." As the connection deepened, Exalira's barriers began to fall. She felt herself letting go, allowing the vulnerability she had fought so hard to suppress to surface. Jack sensed the shift, his movements slowing as he met her gaze. "You're stronger than you let on," he said quietly. "But you don't have to carry all of this alone." Exalira's breath hitched at his words, her lavender eyes shining with unshed emotion. "I have never known another way." "Well," Jack said, his voice steady, "maybe it's time to try one." When it was over, the chamber fell silent, the only sound their labored breathing as they lay side by side on the biobed. The holographic displays flickered, confirming the process's success. The fusion had taken, the genetic compatibility was complete. Exalira turned her head to look at Jack, her expression softer than he had ever seen. "It appears you were correct, Commander." Jack grinned, though his exhaustion was evident. "About which part? My charm or my adaptability?" "Both," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. For the first time, the weight in Exalira's chest lifted, replaced by a tentative hope. The process had not just begun the creation of a new life. It had forged a connection she hadn't expected. As they lay there, their bodies still glowing faintly from the biobe's residual energy, Jack reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "You're not alone in this anymore," he said quietly. Exalira closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of peace. For the first time in years, she believed him. The quiet hum of the royal medical suite settled over Queen Exalira like a calming shroud, though her nerves refused to ease. The room, a seamless blend of bioorganic materials and advanced technology, pulsed faintly with soothing light. Delicate strands of silver and emerald energy wove along the walls like veins of a living entity, creating an environment designed to ease both body and mind. But Exalira's mind was anything but calm. She sat on the edge of an observation platform, her legs folded beneath the flowing white robes of her ceremonial attire. Her opalescent skin, once unmarred, now carried faint traces of gold, a subtle but undeniable change since the procedure. Her fingers brushed the gilded glow, her thoughts racing with implications she could scarcely articulate. "Your Majesty, the readings have stabilized," a voice announced from across the room. High Physician Zerai approached, her expression a practiced mask of professionalism, though the flicker of awe in her emerald eyes betrayed her surprise. "The integration of human DNA has not only been successful, but appears to be accelerating. Your biostructures are adapting at a rate we could not have anticipated." Exalira regarded the physician, her calm facade betraying nothing of the storm within. "And the offspring?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. Zerai hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "The embryo is thriving. Its development is extraordinary. Genetic markers show a perfect fusion of Zyrathian and human traits. This child will not only be an heir, but a bridge between species." The queen absorbed the news in silence, her gaze shifting to the glowing hologram that displayed the intricate design of her own body alongside the embryo. She should have felt relief, perhaps even triumph, but an unfamiliar weight pressed against her chest. Before she could dwell on the thought, the chamber door hissed open, and Jack Sullivan entered, his stride purposeful but cautious. His presence seemed to shift the room's atmosphere, the soft hum of the suite almost fading under the weight of unspoken tension. "How's everything looking?" Jack asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. He glanced at the holographic display, then back at Exalira. "Is it working?" "It is," Exalira replied, her tone clipped. "Your contribution appears to have been effective." Jack quirked a brow at her choice of words, but he let it slide. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze lingering on the faint gold radiance of her skin. "You're glowing," he said, a hint of humor creeping into his voice. "Literally. Is that a Zyrathian thing, or did I overachieve?" Exalira's lips tightened into what might have been a smile, though it was gone before he could be sure. "It is a byproduct of the process. Your chaotic biology is not without its peculiarities." "Chaotic," Jack repeated, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "I'll take that as a compliment." High Physician Zerai cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable with the human's casual tone. "Commander Sullivan, while your genetic contribution has proven invaluable, this process is far from complete. The child's accelerated development will require close monitoring, and the Queen must remain in optimal condition." "Good thing she's got me, then," Jack said, flashing a quick grin at Exalira before turning back to Zerai. "Anything I can do?" "Stay out of the way," Zerai said sharply, though Exalira raised a hand to silence her. "You may remain," the Queen said, her voice calm but firm. "If nothing else, I find your unpredictability useful." Jack tilted his head, acknowledging the half-compliment with a crooked smile. "Useful. I'll take that too." The following weeks were unlike anything Exalira had ever experienced. Her body, long dormant in its reproductive functions, thrummed with a new vitality. The changes were not merely biological, but emotional. She found herself drawn to moments of quiet reflection, her once steadfast composure softened by an inexplicable yearning she couldn't yet name. Jack, true to form, inserted himself into the process with the same irreverent charm that had become his trademark. He asked questions, sometimes insightful, sometimes absurd, but always with a sincerity that caught Exalira off guard. "You ever think about what this kid's going to be like?" Jack asked one evening as they walked through the palace gardens. The air shimmered faintly with the bioluminescence of alien flora, casting an otherworldly glow on their surroundings. Exalira considered his question, her hands clasped behind her back. "The child will inherit the best of both species," she said, her tone measured. "Strength, adaptability, intelligence." Jack nodded, though his expression turned contemplative. "And the weight of two worlds' expectations," he added quietly. "That's a lot for anyone, let alone a kid." Exalira paused, her gaze fixed on a cluster of flowers that shifted colors with each breath of wind. "You underestimate the resilience of Zyrathians," she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Maybe," Jack said, stepping closer, "but I've seen what pressure can do. You can't just build someone out of perfection and hope they don't crack." Exalira turned to face him, her lavender eyes narrowing. "What would you suggest, Commander? That I abandon my duties to spare a hypothetical child discomfort?" Jack held her gaze, unflinching. "No, I'm saying maybe this isn't just about duty anymore. Maybe it's about finding balance." The words lingered between them, a quiet challenge that neither seemed willing to acknowledge outright. Exalira's expression softened, if only slightly, and she turned back toward the path. "Balance," she said, as though testing the word on her tongue. "An interesting concept." It was during one of their late-night conversations that the first complication arose. Exalira had been seated in the council chamber, reviewing reports on the Empire's most pressing issues, when a sudden wave of dizziness overtook her. She gripped the edge of the table, her vision blurring as a surge of heat radiated through her body. Jack, who had been reviewing tactical plans nearby, noticed immediately. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. Exalira waved him off, her pride warring with the alarming sensations coursing through her. "I am fine," she said through gritted teeth. It is nothing. Jack wasn't buying it. He caught her arm, steadying her as she wavered. You don't look fine. Come on, let's get you to the med bay. Despite her protests, Jack practically carried her to the medical suite, his jaw tight with concern. High Physician Zerai met them there, her expression darkening as she scanned the queen. Her Majesty's body is undergoing unanticipated stress, Zerai said, her voice clipped. The fusion is accelerating development beyond safe thresholds. What does that mean? Jack demanded, his voice rising. Is she in danger? Not yet, Zerai said, though her tone was far from reassuring. But if this continues unchecked, the Queen's systems may not sustain the strain. Exilura straightened, her composure returning despite her obvious discomfort. I will not allow this to derail our progress. Do whatever is necessary to ensure the child's survival. Jack's eyes narrowed. And what about you? You can't just— This is my duty, Exilira interrupted, her voice sharp. The child comes first. Jack stepped back, his frustration evident. Duty's great, but not if it gets you killed. Exilira's gaze softened slightly, though her resolve remained unshaken. If that is the cost, I will pay it. Jack didn't reply, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. For the first time, Exilira wondered if she had underestimated the depth of his investment. Not in the child, but in her. In that moment, the weight of what they had begun pressed down on them both, and the path forward grew more uncertain than ever. The chamber pulsed with subdued light, the steady rhythm of soft hums and beeps providing a constant reminder of the delicate balance between science and nature. Queen Ekira lay on the bio-cradle, her body encased in a shimmering cocoon of translucent energy. Her opalescent skin, once unmarred and radiant, now bore streaks of gold that pulsed faintly with the rhythm of her heartbeat. The changes, though subtle, were undeniable. Her body was no longer solely Zyrathian. It was becoming something more. Jack Sullivan stood at the edge of the room, his usual irreverence subdued by the gravity of the moment. The holographic display surrounding him painted a picture of accelerating development. Vital signs, genetic maps, and biosync markers, none of which made much sense to him. What he did understand was the expression on Exilira's face. Despite her regal calm, the strain in her lavender eyes betrayed her exhaustion. She was holding on, but barely. Zerai, Jack said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Tell me we're in the clear. High Physician Zerai, standing at the foot of the bio-cradle, glanced at Jack with a mixture of annoyance and pity. Her Majesty's condition is stable for now, but the hybridization process has taken an unprecedented toll. Zyrathian biology was not designed for such rapid adaptation. Jack moved closer, his hazel eyes narrowing. Stable for now? That doesn't sound like we're out of the woods. Zerai sighed, adjusting the holographic interface with a flick of her hand. The child's development has surpassed all projections. It's not just a biological phenomenon. It's rewriting our understanding of both human and Zyrathian genetics. But the Queen's physiology is under immense strain. The birth must happen soon. Exilira, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, stirred. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of command. If the child is ready, then I will endure whatever is necessary. Jack frowned, crossing his arms. And what happens if you push too hard? You're no good to this kid, or your people, if you don't make it through. Exilira turned her head slightly, her lavender eyes locking onto his. My survival is irrelevant if the child secures the future of my empire. Jack stepped closer, his voice rising slightly. Stop saying that like it's the only option. There's got to be a way to get you both through this. Zerai interjected, her tone sharp. Commander Sullivan, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a matter of biology, not willpower. The Queen has made her decision. Jack shot her a glare, but didn't argue further. Instead, he pulled up a chair beside Exilira, sitting close enough for her to see the determination etched into his face. You don't get to check out, Exilira. Not yet. This kid's going to need someone who knows what they're doing, and that's not me. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a rare softness breaking through her exhaustion. Perhaps chaos has its merits after all. The following hours were a blur of preparation. The palace's medical team worked with clockwork precision, calibrating every piece of equipment for what they called the quickening, a term Jack found both poetic and unnerving. The air in the room grew thick with anticipation as the time approached. Exeter lay back on the bio-cradle, her breathing shallow but steady. The cocoon of energy surrounding her pulsed faster now, a visible indicator of the child's imminent arrival. Jack hovered nearby, unable to sit still, his mind racing with questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. "Commander," Zerai said, breaking his thoughts, "if you intend to remain here, I suggest you prepare yourself. This will not be an ordinary birth." Jack snorted softly. Nothing about this has been ordinary since day one. Zerai raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond, turning her attention back to the holographic display. Jack stepped closer to Exalira, leaning down so she could hear him over the soft hum of the machines. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. Exalira's gaze met his, calm yet resolute. "Readiness is a luxury I cannot afford. I will do what must be done." Jack gave a small nod, his expression softening. "For what it's worth, you've got this. And if you don't, well, I'll just have to figure it out." Her lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Then we are both in uncharted territory." When the moment came, it was unlike anything Jack could have imagined. The room seemed to come alive, the energy cocoon surrounding Exalira glowing brighter as the child began its arrival. The air vibrated with an almost musical resonance, a harmony that seemed to echo through Jack's very bones. Exalira's breath quickened, her hands gripping the edges of the bio-cradle as waves of energy rippled through her. Zerai and the medical team moved with practiced efficiency, monitoring every fluctuation and guiding the process with steady hands. Jack stood frozen, his hazel eyes wide as he watched the light intensify. The holographic displays flickered wildly, showing bursts of data that even Zerai seemed unable to fully comprehend. "Her Majesty's vitals are holding," one technician reported, their voice tinged with awe. "The child's biosignatures are stabilizing." "Good," Zerai replied, her tone sharp. "Keep it steady." Then, with a final burst of golden light, the cocoon dissolved, leaving the room in stunned silence. Exalira lay back, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. But her eyes remained open, fixed on the figure cradled in Zerai's arms. The child was breathtaking. Their golden skin shimmered faintly, as if lit from within, and their eyes, one lavender, one hazel, seemed impossibly bright. Tiny streaks of opalescent silver traced along their limbs, marking them as both Zyrathian and something entirely new. They let out a single, clear cry, the sound resonating in the air like a note from some celestial instrument. Jack exhaled, not realizing he had been holding his breath. "Holy!" Exalira reached out weakly, interrupting him. "Let me see them." Zerai carefully placed the child in Exalira's arms, her movements reverent. The queen cradled the infant against her chest, her lavender eyes softening as she gazed down at her offspring. For a moment, the weight of her exhaustion seemed to fade, replaced by something Jack could only describe as wonder. "They are perfect," Exalira whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the child. "You're not wrong. They're wow." Exalira glanced at him, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. "For once, your eloquence fails you." Jack chuckled softly. "What can I say? I'm speechless." The days following the child's birth were a whirlwind of activity. News of the hybrid heir spread rapidly through the Zyrathian Empire and beyond, sparking reactions that ranged from jubilant celebration to cautious skepticism. Exalira, though still recovering, began receiving delegations almost immediately, each eager to see the child who had already become a symbol of unity and change. For Jack, the whirlwind felt strangely grounding. He found himself spending more and more time with Exalira and the child, drawn to their quiet moments amidst the chaos. Though he joked about being the galaxy's first interstellar babysitter, it was clear to anyone who saw him that his connection to the child, and to Exalira, ran far deeper. One evening, as the three of them sat in the palace garden under the glow of twin moons, Exalira broke the comfortable silence. "You have changed everything, Commander," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Jack, who was holding the child carefully in his arms, looked up at her. "Pretty sure you're the one who did all the hard work." Exalira shook her head slightly, her gaze steady. "I could not have done it without you." Jack smiled, his hazel eyes warm. "Well, I guess chaos has its merits." Exalira's lips curved into a rare smile. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the future seemed not just possible but bright. The grand hall of the Zarathian palace was alive with activity. Delegates from across the galaxy crowded the sprawling chamber, their voices a low hum of speculation and intrigue. The towering crystalline walls refracted light into rainbows that danced across the room, a stunning display of elegance and power. At the far end of the chamber, Queen Exalira stood beneath the grand crest of her empire, her posture regal despite the strain etched into her features. In her arms, she held her child, Kalir, the hybrid heir whose very existence had sent ripples across the galaxy. Their golden skin glimmered faintly under the shifting light, and their mismatched eyes, one lavender, one hazel, seemed to survey the room with an intelligence far beyond their age. The hall quieted as Exalira stepped forward, every movement precise, every detail of her appearance a calculated assertion of control. Jack Sullivan stood to her right, slightly behind her, wearing the ceremonial robes of an official Zyrathian envoy. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of place among the assembly of diplomats, monarchs, and military leaders. Despite the unfamiliarity, his presence was undeniable. His hazel eyes darted around the room, catching every subtle glance and whispered comment aimed at the queen and her child. "Your Majesty," a voice called from the crowd, breaking the silence. It belonged to a tall, Zyrathian noble clad in emerald robes, their voice smooth yet edged with skepticism. "You have summoned us here to witness the child. But what assurances can you offer that this experiment will not lead to instability?" Exalira's lavender eyes hardened, her tone cutting through the room like a blade. "This child is not an experiment. Kalir is the culmination of centuries of progress, a symbol of what we can achieve when we embrace unity rather than fear." The noble inclined their head, but their expression remained unconvinced. Even so, the union of Zarathian and human genetics raises questions about purity and tradition. Will this child truly embody our legacy, or dilute it? Before Exalira could respond, Jack stepped forward, his casual demeanor replaced by an intensity that silenced the murmurs rippling through the hall. "With all due respect, if tradition is your priority, maybe it's time to question whether it's holding you back." The noble bristled, their green skin darkening with indignation. "You overstep, human." Jack held their gaze unflinching. "Maybe. But here's the thing. This kid represents the best of both our worlds. They're not just Zyrathian or human. There's something new, something better. If that scares you, maybe you're the one clinging to outdated ideas." A stunned silence followed his words. Exalira turned her head slightly, just enough for Jack to catch the faintest curve of her lips. She faced the assembly once more, her voice calm but resolute. "The child's existence is not a threat, but an opportunity," Exalira said. "Kalir is proof that we are capable of adaptation, of growth. If we cannot embrace this, then we doom ourselves to stagnation." The crowd shifted uneasily, the weight of her words settling over them. Slowly, one by one, members of the assembly began to bow their heads, their gestures small but significant. After the assembly dispersed, Exalira and Jack retreated to the palace's private garden. The air was crisp and fragrant, the bioluminescent plants casting a soft glow over the pathways. Kalir, now sleeping in a delicately crafted carrier, rested peacefully beside them. Jack leaned against a curved pillar, his ceremonial robes slightly askew. "Well, that was fun. Nothing like being stared at by 100 people who want to throttle you." Exalira chuckled softly, a sound so rare that it caught Jack off guard. "You handled yourself well." though I doubt High Noble Varek appreciated your candor. Jack smirked. They needed to hear it. Besides, I figured you'd jump in if I really stuck my foot in my mouth. Your confidence in my intervention is misplaced, Exilira said, her tone laced with dry humor. Jack laughed, then turned serious. You think they'll come around? Exilira looked toward the horizon, where twin moons hung low in the sky. They must. The survival of the Zarathian Empire depends on our ability to adapt. Kaler's existence forces them to confront their fears. Change is rarely welcomed, but it is often necessary. Jack nodded, his gaze softening as it shifted to her. You know, you're pretty good at this whole leadership thing. She arched a brow. Am I to take that as praise, Commander? Yeah, Jack said, his voice quieter now. You've been through hell, and you're still standing. That's worth a lot. Exalira turned to him, her expression unreadable. And what of you, Jack Sullivan? Do you still believe chaos holds the answers? Jack grinned, though there was a gentleness in his eyes. I think sometimes it's not about answers. It's about asking the right questions and being willing to dive in, even when you don't know what's next. Exalira regarded him for a long moment before speaking. Your perspective is refreshing. Is that Zyrathian 4 annoying but occasionally useful? Jack asked. She almost smiled again. Perhaps. Later that night, as Exalira prepared for rest, she found herself standing over Kalir's sleeping form. The child's tiny hand curled around one of her fingers, their golden skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. For the first time in years, Exalira felt something she had long believed lost, hope. Jack appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. You all right? Exalira glanced at him, her expression soft. I am adjusting. He stepped into the room, his movements quiet. You're doing better than all right. This kid's lucky to have you. And you, Exalira said, surprising them both. She looked away, adding, your chaos has proven invaluable. Jack chuckled, the sound low and warm. I'll take it. They stood in companionable silence, the weight of their journey settling into something lighter. For the first time, the path ahead felt less like an endless struggle and more like an open horizon. Together, they had forged something new, something stronger, and for that, neither would ever walk alone again. The palace garden was serene under the twin moons, their silvery lights spilling over the bioluminescent flowers and casting soft shadows on the polished stone pathways. The air carried a quiet stillness, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the distant hum of energy fields protecting the capital. Queen Ekira sat on a carved stone bench, her child, Kalir, nestled in her arms. The infant's golden skin shimmered faintly, as if absorbing the starlight, and their mismatched lavender and hazel eyes reflected an intelligence that belied their tender age. Jack Sullivan stood a few feet away, leaning against a curved column and watching the scene with a mix of awe and quiet reverence. His usual humor was absent, replaced by a rare sense of stillness. In the weeks since Kalir's birth, the galaxy had begun to shift in ways none of them could have anticipated. Yet here, in this quiet moment, it all felt impossibly distant. They're beautiful, Jack said softly, his voice carrying no trace of his usual levity. Exalira looked up at him, her lavender eyes softening. They are, she agreed, and they will carry the weight of two worlds on their shoulders. Jack moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bench. Maybe, but they'll have you to guide them. And they'll have me to remind them when they're taking things too seriously. Exalira let out a quiet chuckle, the sound surprising them both. Chaos and order, she said. An unlikely foundation, yet it seems to hold. Jack grinned. Hey, it's working so far. The next day marked Kalir's formal presentation to the Zyrathian Empire. The Grand Hall had been transformed into a magnificent display of light and sound, with delegates from across the galaxy gathered to witness the momentous event. The child, cradled in a ceremonial carrier, was placed at the center of the dais, surrounded by glowing sigils that represented both Zarathian heritage and humanity's symbol of unity, the interlocking rings of Earth's interstellar federation. Exeter stood tall beside Kalir, her presence commanding as she addressed the assembly. Her voice, steady and clear, echoed through the chamber. My people, today we embrace not only a new era, but a new era. Kaler represents the union of our legacy with the resilience of humanity. They are a testament to our ability to evolve, to adapt, and to thrive. Let their existence remind us that strength lies not in isolation, but in unity. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound that filled the hall and resonated deep within its crystalline walls. Exalira allowed herself a brief moment to breathe, her gaze shifting to Jack, who stood just behind her in his Zyrathian ceremonial robes. He gave her a subtle thumbs up, his hazel eyes twinkling with pride. When the applause subsided, a noble stepped forward. High Noble Varek, one of Exalira's most vocal critics, bowed deeply before speaking. Your Majesty, while I have long questioned this path, today I find myself humbled. The child is extraordinary, and their presence speaks of a future I had not dared to envision. You have my allegiance. Exalira inclined her head, the noble's words carrying the weight of a galaxy beginning to shift. She knew the battle for acceptance was far from over, but this moment marked a turning point. That evening, after the ceremony, Exalira and Jack sat together in a secluded corner of the garden, Kaler sleeping soundly between them. The flickering light of the bioluminescent plants painted their faces in shades of gold and silver, a quiet contrast to the grand spectacle of the day. Jack broke the silence first, his voice soft. You did it. The speech, the ceremony, it all went off without a hitch. You've got them on your side. Exalira shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. This is only the beginning. The galaxy does not change overnight. True, Jack said, but it's a start, and starts are important. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their journey settling into something lighter. Exalira glanced at Jack, her gaze lingering. You have been invaluable, Jack Sullivan. Without your chaos, I do not believe we would have reached this point. Jack smirked, though his voice carried a rare sincerity. And without your order, we'd probably still be arguing in some lab somewhere. Guess we make a decent team. Exalira's smile widened, a genuine warmth shining through her usual composure. It appears we do. Jack leaned back, looking up at the twin moons. So, what's next for you, Your Majesty? Exalira considered the question, her gaze drifting to the sleeping child in her arms. I will raise Kaler to understand the weight of their legacy and the strength found in balance. And I will guide my people through the challenges ahead. Jack nodded. Sounds like a full plate. And you? Exalira asked, surprising him. What will you do? Jack hesitated, then shrugged. I guess I stick around. Kaler's going to need a bit of chaos in their life, and someone's got to keep you on your toes. Exalira arched an elegant brow. You presume much, Commander. Always, Jack said with a grin. As the night deepened, Exalira and Jack remained in the garden, their quiet companionship a testament to how far they had come. The galaxy was vast and uncertain, but in that moment, under the light of the twin moons, they felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Kaler stirred in Exalira's arms, letting out a soft, musical coo that seemed to echo the harmony between their two worlds. Jack reached over, gently brushing a golden strand of hair from the child's face. You're going to be something incredible, kid, he said softly. Exalira looked at him, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps the galaxy will finally understand what we have achieved here. Jack met her gaze, his grin softening into something genuine. They will, because we're going to make sure of it. Together, they looked out over the garden, the weight of the past behind them and the promise of the future stretching infinitely ahead. For the first time in their lives, they felt not just hope, but certainty. They had built something extraordinary, a legacy that would endure.